Happy Thursday, and we are here today to make a picture frame, and more specifically, this is a no miter picture frame. So there's a lot going on here. One, it's still a good skill to learn how to cut miters in your shop, but one aspect of this is it gives you a different option. I'll get you up close on this picture frame and you can see exactly what it looks like. And then two, if you do struggle with miters, this is a way to put a picture frame together without any miters. One thing that's really important is that in the description for today's live event, there's a link for this. And this is a PDF download that goes specifically with this project. And there's quite a bit of information in here that you need in order to move forward with this. If nothing else, there's a formula that you'll use that'll help you calculate sizes of parts. So that's going to be a really important part of this. So make sure that you grab that download so that you know where we're going. I think what I will do right away at this stage is get you zoomed in so that you can see what's happening here. Another important part of this is we could do this at the table saw with the dado head or at a router table with a straight bit. I find the table saw dado head setup maybe a little bit easier. I mean, the setup is really similar between the two, but the work is maybe a little easier. The cutting is a little easier, I think, on a table saw than on the router table, but either approach is going to work. I don't really see being able to do this with a handheld router. It would just be very awkward to work with these relatively small pieces. So table saw or router table would do this, dado head or straight bit. Let's look at this. Although if you have the packet in your hot little hands, you've got a picture of the project in front of you. Because that's where we're going to go next. Right there. So here's what we got going. No miter picture frame. So just like the name says, there are no miters across those corners, but it's not a butt joint. It looks like it is, but it's not. It's actually not a tongue and groove. It's a rabbited joint. And the way it's going to work is that with one setup on the table saw or the router table, we'll be able to make all the cuts that bring this together. Let's do a little bit of terminology so you're on the same page as me with words. When we look at face frames or doors, the vertical components we refer to as stiles. The horizontal components we call rails. I'm going to do the same thing here just to keep our parts straight. I'm going to call these our stiles, these are rails. For me, my eye likes when the stile is continuous top to bottom and the rail butts into it. That's subjective in this case. That's a common approach on cabinet face frames and doors as well. But on your frame, if you like it better looking like that, where the stile butts into the rail, that's cool. I'm going to go this way. What you need to do, a really important part of this is when you make your frame pieces, you want to make some scrap pieces, some test pieces at the same time. And the reason for this is that getting the depth of cut on our cutter, dado head or router bit, is really important part of this. So you're going to want some material that is exactly the same thickness as the project pieces. Easiest way to make that happen is to machine these at the same time as we machine these. Here's step one. I'm going to get this frame out of the way. I'm going to grab one of my parts, and what we want here is to determine where the center of this thickness is. A real common way, if you've watched my videos, you've seen me do this 11 billion times. A common way for me to do this is to position my finger and the tip of the pencil. My finger is locked on that face. Draw a line. Don't change this setting. Rotate. Draw a line. That shows me that the center is there someplace. I'm going to use that, the middle line, to set the height of my cutter. If this finger thing doesn't work for you, you can measure, you can use a marking gauge, whatever floats your boat. But this is a very fast way for me to get this marked out. What we want to do with that information is, saw's unplugged. We want to use that to set the height of the dado head or the router bit. I'm using a 1/2 inch wide dado head. And we want the cutter, dado head or router bit, to be a little bit bigger than the rabbet that we're making. When you look at your packet, you will see we're going to do a 3/8 wide rabbet. So I want the cutter, again, dado or router bit, to be a little bit bigger than that. What I just did here is I set the top of the dado head so it's slightly below my center line. When I do my test cuts, I want to cut not enough material off. I want this cut to be a little shy. We'll do a test cut, and then we'll just keep sneaking up on it to get it exactly right. So I want to make sure I'm taking off too little, not too much on this first pass. If you're jumping in with us late, I've mentioned already, make sure you grab this PDF. This is a link in the description, and this is going to give you a bunch of information you need in order to make these frames, including the formula for calculating your part sizes. So the height is approximated. The cutter should still be too shallow. Next thing that we want is to position the fence. On a table saw with a dado head, I need to bury part of this cutter. That's a 1/2 inch wide dado head. I'm going to make a 3/8 rabbet. So to bury part of the cutter, I'm putting a sacrificial fence on. Now what's going to happen on the back of this, you're not going to be able to see, but I've got slots cut in there, and these micro jig clamps go in that slot. One there, one there. And then when I rotate this and get it up over the fence, I can clamp it, Jed. Young people won't get that reference. Now for fence position, so if we're doing this on a router table, your router table fence is split, and you can only expose as much of the router bit as you want. You don't need a sacrificial fence on a router table. We do this here on a table saw so that we can bury part of that. Now to locate the fence, either tool, router table or table saw, I'm going to use 3/8 bar stock, and I'm using that so that the edge of the bar stock is even with this outside edge of the dado head. And the face of the bar stock is up against the fence. And again, round one here is scrap. So these are just test cuts. Now I'm going to just zoom out and up. So I'm just going to grab my iPad and see if there are questions before I start cutting wood. While I'm waiting for that, I'm going to plug my table saw back in. Okay. So Kim asks, does the sacrificial fence have to be solid wood or can it be made from plywood? I actually prefer man-made stuff for the sacrificial fence over solid wood because that's generally more stable. I don't want this to distort over time. The other thing with it is that you're cutting into it. It's sacrificial. I make mine out of 3/4 inch MDF. It's very reasonable. It's very economical. It's easy to work with. And this is, I mean, admittedly, this sacrificial fence has been in my shop a couple of years, but the day is going to come when, because I've cut into it down here, I'm going to throw it out and make another one. So it's an easy commodity to not worry about throwing out and getting another one. So I make mine out of MDF. Melamine would be a good choice. Plywood would be a okay choice as long as it's flat. It's key to this that we're fastening this. We're basically now using it as a rip fence. So this has to be as flat as you would expect your rip fence, as straight as you would expect your rip fence to be. And we got, looks like Dennis in West Virginia, Rob in New Jersey. And that's it for preguntas ahora. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab the miter gauge. I'll give you kind of a big picture while we're zoomed out. With the miter gauge, we're going to do this. We're going to make a pass over the dado head, set that test piece. This is not the project yet. Set that test piece aside, grab another one, make a pass over the dado head. And what we'll do then is bring those two pieces together. And the test cut is showing us, one, is the fence in the right spot? I'll show you how to know that or not, how to see if it is or not. And then two, is the dado head the right height? And that's the really, really more critical, that's the way more critical aspect of this. Once we have that set, I'll zoom out again, we'll look for questions, and then we're going to be ready to cut our real parts. So, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to leave the camera where it is for now, zoomed out for these cuts, but then I'll bring you in for the next step, just so you can kind of see. I'm looking at my monitor, so you can see the big picture of what's going on here. Okay, dust collection. Now let me anticipate a question, which is, people say regarding the table saw, never use the miter gauge and the rip fence at the same time, which never is a really long time. That applies to a scenario in which we're cutting off a piece of wood. If instead of a dado head, I had a regular blade in here and I was cutting this dimensionally, I was removing a chunk from the end, then this would be very unsafe. Because we're doing this with a dado head and all we're making is dust, that's why with a miter gauge and the rip fence, it works in this application. The other thing that's noteworthy is that when I do this, I go through the cut. I never back up over the spinning blade. I go through the cut, I come off of it, then I'm ready for the next one. So I'm never pulling material back over a spinning blade. Now, what we'll do is, I think now I have to zoom you in so you can see this detail. So let's get back to the blade. I know that's not a blade, those are clamps. Here are our tests. First one is very easy. The first one is simply grab your bar stock that you use to set the fence and do this. If those are flush across the end grain, your fence location is done. So when I do this, that is fine. Now this is not that critical because you'll see when we cut this, whatever this setting is, they're all going to be the same. And that's where it's the consistency that's really, really important, more so than having this perfectly accurate. So don't split hairs over this. If you're close, you're going to be fine. More importantly, is when I bring these two parts together like this, there's a drawing of this in the packet, they need to be flush across this top face. And they're not. This piece is higher than this one. And that's because I very intentionally set the dado head so it was a little too shallow. I want to sneak up on this being the right setting. Router bit or dado head, what you have to do now is raise the cutter. And here's what's really, really important. If looking at this is a bazillionth of an inch, you need a half a bazillionth change on your cutter. Realistically, this is probably a 16th of an inch, maybe a little bit more. We're going to cut this piece and we're going to cut this piece. So the change you make on the cutter is half whatever this discrepancy is. So I'm going to raise my blade just a skosh, and then I'm just going to do more test cuts until I have that right. Here we go again. You can cut the same parts. Compare. Still not flush, face is still high right there. Oh, just a tiny, tiny, tiny change. And of course, I went too far. So now this face is below this one. I lowered, or I raised my dado head just a little bit too much. So I'm starting over, fresh end. The beauty of live woodworking. I think it was actually, I should have marked my bad ends. There we go. Those are flush. So good end, good end. Not that it matters too much anymore because we're done with these test pieces. I'm going to bring you out again. We got to do some marking and I'll look for questions again. Whoop, that's in, not out. All right, let me do questions first. Bill says, what dado head are you using? This is the Freud 8-inch. And Marcel is in the Netherlands. That's pretty cool. Overseas. Now, let's avoid mistakes. So here's what we need to do. When you look at the drawings in your packet, rails and stiles all get the same cut on the back. That cut is the long rabbet that goes from end to end on each piece. That rabbet eventually is going to receive your picture. So what I'm going to do is I'm just looking at all my parts and deciding front face, back face. So if there are any defects I'm trying to hide or whatever, that could be what determines it here. So what I want to do is mark the front. And the reason for that, for me, is that the reason I mark the front face is then I can see it when I'm machining my parts. So if I'm choosing that as the front, X, 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 X. Now when I come here to make that long rabbet on the back, I know if the X is up, I'm cutting the right face. I can see my mark. On your rails, again, look at the drawing in your packet. On those rails, they get a rabbet on their end grain. So when I do that cut, you'll see me do it in a second. When I do that cut, you flip it over and it's going to be X down for that. So all 4 pieces go good face up to get the long grain cut. The rails, the horizontals for me, go good face down to get the end grain cut. So I believe I am going to do the same thing here, which is I'll leave you zoomed out for a couple of cuts. I'll leave you zoomed out for the two of the long grain cuts so you can kind of see the big picture. And then I'll bring you in for the last 2 and the cross grain cuts. Are you ready for this? Edge against the fence. Push stick. Little chip under my material. There we go. Now, on any of these cuts, because they're quasi-wabbits, because they're rabbits, if as you're cutting, it feels like the material moves away from the fence or something, just keep on keeping on. Go finish the cut and then come back and cut it again. The cool thing about a rabbit is that you can't take too much material off. You can only take too little off. If it moves away from the fence, you don't want to leave it that way because then the rabbit's too narrow and it's going to mess you up later. So if there's any risk at all that it swam off the fence, just cut it again. And that same thing applies to doing the end grain cut. These are done. They have their long rabbet. I'm going to zoom you in, do the rabbets on the other 2 parts, and then do the end grain cuts as well. All right, all right, all right. X up. X up. Then I'm grabbing my rails. There's the existing cut. There's my X. The end grain gets cut, X down. X down. You're done. Now the way this all comes together right now over me, wouldn't that be a great lyric for a song, is we've got a little rabbet cut in the end that tucks into the rabbet that's cut in the long grain like that, leaving a rabbet on the back that's going to receive your picture. So next thing is we can put that all together. And I think, I'll leave you where you are for, see how this goes. I do not normally assemble at my table saw, but I'm saving moving the camera all the way over to my assembly bench, which is always covered with rosin paper. Rosin paper is a wonderful thing. You can get that at a home center. What it's really for is putting it under flooring. It's a little bit of a vapor barrier under flooring. Standard yellow glue, gonna need a brush, gonna need some clampicity. I'm gonna get all 4 of these rabbits. I'm gonna get glue on all 4 of these rabbits. And then work fairly quickly to make sure it doesn't get away from me and start to dry. And this is going to be, there are a couple steps in this clamping. I'm going to bring the rabbit together, the end rabbit together with a long grain rabbit. Big deal at this stage of the game is making sure that this outside long grain is even with the end grain. And when you clamp this, just a little bit of pressure, because we're probably going to have to still manipulate this a little. Same thing on this side. Making sure I have 2 flush surfaces out there. A little bit of pressure, just enough to keep everything together. Rinse and repeat. Flush on the outside. Now, right there is the reason that we're being gentle with this vertical pressure right now, which is, oh, please. There's a little gapicity right there. No big deal. So what we're going to do with these other clamps is go this way. So you want to leave those vertical clamps loosey-goosey enough that when I do this, when I close it this way, those parts can move. Once we've closed the rabbits in this direction, now you can go back and put a little more oomph on these, and then let that whole thing dry. Yeah, let me come out again and look at questions. Get that wrong every time. Elaine asks, can I adapt this for a mirror? Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing, right? You just need for a mirror or a picture or, I don't know, a piece of glass, you just need a frame with a rabbit that you can put a thing in. So this could be, if you were doing a glass door on a cabinet, you could be putting it together this way. Kim says, how wide did you make the dado setup for this project? The dado head is a 1/2 inch wide. So you want, whether you're at the router table or the table saw for this, you want, it's easiest if the cutter is a little bigger than the resulting rabbet. 3/8 rabbet, 1/2 inch cutter. Henry says, would a backer board prevent chip out? Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up because I forgot to mention it. When we do that cross grain cut, there's a good chance there that when the cutter exits, it's going to chip out. So look at our test pieces. With these, we made a cut like this. Now, this is, that would have been the exit side right there, and there aren't any chips on that. Couple reasons. This is cherry, and cherry isn't all that prone to chipping. Maple, birch, red oak, those are all woods that would be way more, would have a much greater tendency to chip. The other is, this is a really good dado head. This Freud dado head cuts really, really, really well. If you want to buy insurance that that's not going to chip out no matter what you're using as a cutter or what wood you're using, then we'd want a backer board behind this piece. So we'd want a sacrificial piece this way, so that in the miter gauge, when I do that end grain cut, another piece is behind it, and that's going to completely eliminate chipping. So yeah, sorry I forgot to mention that when I was making those cuts. Somebody said, what about being square? You know, here's the deal. You have to, it's a great question. When you make these parts, I cross-cut these at my miter saw over there. You have to make sure the ends are cut squarely, squarely, whatever it is. That way, when you're on your miter gauge and the end grain of that piece is against this fence, if you cut them square and your miter gauge is square, you're going to make this, where do I keep putting that thing? You're going to make this end grain rabbet perfectly square to the edge. So when you pull this closed, part of the effect of putting these clamps on this way is that I'm pulling long grain up against this shoulder, and that's going to automatically square everything. So the bottom line out of all of that is, if you accurately cut your parts to size, meaning the two rails are identical and the two stiles are identical, the ends are cut square, and your miter gauge is square when you come here to do this, or router table, this can't assemble out of square because of the way we're pulling that closed. It has to be square. Kevin says, how do you spell the backing paper? So I think it's actually, I miss this. It's either RESIN, resin paper, which I believe is what it is, or rosin, ROSIN. I'm pretty sure it's resin paper, RESIN. Home centers have it. Home Depot has it. Rosin would be what, the stuff that pitchers put on baseballs. Do they put that on baseballs, or that's illegal? I don't know. I'm not a sports guy. Rosin is what went on my bow when I was playing violin in middle school. ROSIN. Fun fact. And I contend, had they taught me to fiddle instead of playing classical music, I would still be playing, but no. Rob wants to know what the groove in the sacrificial fence is for. That's if I'm in a scenario where I need a feather board as a hold down, I've got a feather board that'll go in that 3/4 inch wide groove, and I could put down pressure over the cut. Don't need it for these. And Ricky is in Shelbyville, Tennessee. I believe I was there when we did the motorcycle trip to the Blue Ridge Parkway. I feel like on the way back, I was in, or at least went through, Shelbyville. We came up through Sevierville. Is that close to that? We were in Sevierville, and then Nashville, and then someplace else. Okay, done with this. Now, while you weren't looking, the shop elves were here, and they put a coat of finish on a cherry frame and drilled a hole in the back so it could get hung on a wall. And all I want to do with this is show you how you can retain everything in here. So put something down on your bench, because now this is finished. And I'm going to zoom you in again so you can see these gizmos. And then I will answer questions, uno más tiempo, and then we can all go have lunch. So here's what we've got. There's a sandwich, 1/8-inch plexiglass. So, you know, the nice thing with plexiglass for this is it's so easy to cut on the table saw. We've got a video about cutting plexiglass. There are things you need to do to make it go well, but it's easy to do. Not that you can't cut glass in your shop, but I would say it's much easier for me to cut plexiglass than glass. So my plexiglass is about 1/8 of an inch thick. That's from a home center. I've got hardboard or masonite, 1/8 inch, also from a home center. So plexiglass or glass, picture, obviously, backer board. We want all that to stay in there. These guys, which are called glazier points, work really well for this. They're really used, a glazier is somebody who works on windows, makes windows, and they're used as a retainer when glass goes in a window frame. But they also work really well for this. The way they work is, I will show you on this edge right here. There's a little shoulder on that point, and you can put your putty knife up against that shoulder, push down, that seats everything against the rabbet, and then just push forward. And a little bit of rocking and rolling is going to help that go in. Don't worry about trying to get those shoulders all the way up against that edge, because that's, especially in a hardwood, like in pine, you could probably do it. But in a hardwood, I don't think it's going to happen. You just need enough to make sure that's going to retain. And then do 1, 2, 3, 4, and that'll be plenty to hold that in there. Those are sourced for you in the PDF. Cool with a capital K, which also describes the weather today. So while I'm waiting for like the last of the questions to come in, today at 4 Central Time is the monthly hour-long Q&A that we always do. So tune in for that, and I will do my best to answer your questions. I want to point out that Max, it's August, right? I'll have to have Max correct me if I'm wrong. In an upcoming Thursday live, not the 11 o'clock one, but the 4 o'clock one, we're going to have a chemist from Tight Bond Glue is going to be live with me. And that is going to be an all about glue hour. So these questions that are, how do I know if my glue has gone bad? How long does glue last? Can I use glue for this? Can I size end grain with glue? Can I, so Bob from Tight Bond will be live with me. And that is, like I said, I'm pretty sure it's the Thursday in August is when we're doing that. But just watch your email, watch social media, and we will announce that ahead of time. So Don says, is this considered a strong joint or just good for picture frames? It's pretty strong because you got a lot of glue surface there. If I were making a door, a big door, if I were making a frame for stained glass or a big mirror, I would do what's called a rabbeted half lap. We've got video content on that technique. The difference is that on a rabbeted half lap, this component is this part, the rabbet that you cut here, is as wide as the mating piece. So when these come together, instead of that having a 3/8 overlay with the rabbet, it has in this case, that's a 2-inch piece. It has 2-inch overlay with the mating piece. So there's way more glue surface there. That joint I would defy you to break. I mean, even this one, if I grab this and just leaned on a corner and pushed and pushed, and with nothing in there, with it open, it would fracture the wood. The joint wouldn't fail. It would rip chunks of cherry out. With that rabbeted half lap joint, you have way more surface contact, and it's incredibly strong. So again, if my mom has a chunk of stained glass at her house, and when I made the frame for that, I did a rabbeted half lap in Honduras mahogany for that stained glass. Thomas says, thank you. I really hate miter joints and can start knocking these out. This definitely will lend itself to mass production. I mean, in standing here talking, it took me 43 minutes to make this one. You could make these, you could make frames so fast with this approach. And your conventional clamps will put it together. Where with putting mitered components together, you're better off with band clamps or specialized mitered glue-up clamps. Or obviously with this, pointing to the glue-up, which you can't see over there, your everyday clamps will work for this. Kim says, neat project, I want to try it. James says, do you worry a little bit about the frame not staying flat? No. This, what we're doing here is just like making a face frame or a door frame or a picture frame or whatever. So as long as the material you're starting with is dry, has acclimated to your shop environment, you're going to be fine with stability and this staying flat. So, couple things. So Max confirmed, sorry, I'm reading a bunch of questions and I lost my train of thought. Squirrel. Max confirmed the Titebond Q&A is August 10th, 4 o'clock Central Time. Put that on your Google Calendar right now. Marcel says, you have to agree with me that confidence is good, but chucking is better. I don't know what you are referring. If you're referring to it being square, if you see, or when you see this end grain, where are we? Really washed out by light is where we are. If you see this end grain close against that long grain on all 4 corners, it can't not be square. And if it, at that stage, if somehow it is out of square, it's because you cut these wrong and you got to start over. So if they close, they close. And in this case, it really is that simple. Julie says, you do a phenomenal job teaching and catering to various skill sets and keeping everyone safe during their attempts to create. Thank you. Can't wait to see you open your next video with a live violin performance. My violin is right there in my office. So I'm 62. I started playing that thing when I was 11. So and it was my uncle's before it was mine. So we know it's 51 years old. I don't know how long he had it before me. So I've yanked it out every once in a while and messed with it. I taught myself to play acoustic guitar. One of these winters in Wisconsin, when I have nothing else to do, I'm going to teach myself to play violin. Again, it would be very fun. And thank you for the very nice compliment. Additionally, Michael asked about today's Q&A. Max has a link for that in the comments. Two questions about the hanger hole. So locating it, all I do is measure the length of this, center the hole. And I think in this case, it's also centered across this width. Does that look right? Yeah, it's centered across that width. Pretty commonly on frames, I'll cut a keyhole slot here, and you can do that on a router table or with a plunge router. And I make the keyhole slot long, maybe 1.5 inches long. That gives you the opportunity to get on a hanger and move the picture until it hangs level. But if you center this hole, that's going to work just fine for this to hang. I mean, it's like a plumb bob, you know. If the hole is centered, this is going to hang level when it's on the wall. And the other one with that was, what do you use to make the hole? I just drilled that with a 1/2 inch Forstner bit and do that. It's best to do it on a drill press so you can set depth of drill so you don't ventilate the front of the frame. And I'm going to spend 1 second to see if I have something with a keyhole slot. Yeah, not that. There's nothing right. Oh, there we go. So this is what I mean by a keyhole slot, done with a keyhole router bit. So I do this on a router table, plunge into the cut, make the cut, exit the cut, and you get that. So part of the benefit to that is you can get on your hanger in the wall and move back and forth. So this is still centered, but it gives you some wiggle room this way to get level. Okay, Kim says, I tend to struggle with the amount of glue to use in a joint. Me too. I usually go conservative to lessen smush out. Looks like you glued both pieces. How do you know how much to use? So I didn't. As a rule, I only glue half of a joint. So all I did was put glue on the rabbet, on the end grain rabbet. Then I put everything together. And you know, how much to use is always a question. I want there to be a little bit squeeze out. If you come back August 10th, when Bob is here from Tight Bond, we can all ask Bob, how do we know how much to use? Because I like to see a little bit of squeeze out, but I don't want to have a waterfall of glue coming out of there either. So a lot of that, you know, I hate this answer, but I'm going to say it anyway. A lot of that comes from the experience of gluing stuff and way overdoing it at times in my life, and then hopefully not underdoing it. You don't want to starve it for glue because you're not going to have any strength there. So spread a thin film. Hopefully you see a little bit of squeeze out, and then you should be good. All right, I'm refreshing just to make sure, like I'm not refreshing, but I'm refreshing the page. Once again, live at 4 o'clock tonight, same bat location, and then put that August 10th one on your calendar when the Tight Bond guy is going to be here. And it looks like Kim's question is our last. So I am going to go eat lunch, and then I will see you back here at 4 o'clock. Max, punch us out.